Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Safeopedia webinar. My name is Samantha, and I want to wish you a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I want to give you all a shout out for being here today, and I want to thank all of our EH&S professionals, operational, and any safety-minded individuals with free safety information, tools, and education. So thank you for all the great work you do on a daily basis in keeping us and our workplaces safe. Today, we are proud to present Flame On or Flame Off, Navigating SFR versus Standard Chemical Protection. Today, the DuPont team is going to help you explore the critical distinctions between standard chemical protective garments and secondary flame-resistant apparel to ensure that you can assess and navigate whether you need flame on or flame off. I'm very excited to have you all sit back, relax, and enjoy this presentation. With that, let's jump into it.
Thank you, Samantha. Good afternoon, good morning, right? My name is Joe Michelotti. I'm the Regional Sales Manager with DuPont. Along with me is another Regional Sales Manager, Steve Mata. And today's topic, again, is going to be flame on or flame off, navigating between secondary flame resistance versus standard chemical protection. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. Today we're just going to take a quick look at our agenda, and I'll start by kind of giving you a high-level look at the chemical industry and some of the challenges that exist as it relates to chemical and thermal hazards in these environments. We'll be able to talk through the importance of hazard risk assessments and some protective apparel selection criteria to consider as well. And then next, we'll walk through some pain points or challenges you may encounter when it comes to protective apparel, and some of our solutions that can really help tackle these challenges, whether it's dealing with chemical hazards, dealing with flame and chemical dual hazards, and finally, not knowing which garment to choose. And that's where we can really help support you guys. So the goal of today's webinar is that you'll walk away with a clear view of the differences between standard chemical protective garments and secondary flame-resistant apparel, and where they apply to help you confidently answer the question between flame on or flame off. So that being said, we'll dive right into it. If you don't mind going to the next slide. So why are we here today, right? Chemical hazards and flame hazards are all over the place. As you can see here, they're anywhere from refineries, petrochem, to chemical manufacturing, labs, maintenance, and even hazmat response. And it gets even more complex when these hazards exist simultaneously, which is why proper selection of PPE is so critical in these industries. If you take a look at some of the stats here, when you look at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics data from 2021 and 2022, across all the industries, chemical burns accounted for nearly 7,500 non-fatal injuries involving days away from work, and thermal burns accounted for over 25,000 cases. And 1,600 of those were associated with an explosion or a fire related to the ignition of vapors, gases, and or liquids. You can go to the next slide. So when we specifically look at the chemical manufacturing industry, over the 12,000 days away from work cases, over 2,800 were associated with exposure to harmful substances or environments, of which 420 cases were due to chemical burns and 380 related to thermal burns. Unfortunately, injuries are occurring, which means people are not going home to their families at the end of the day, the same way they arrived into the workforce. And not only that, there are costs associated with these injuries, right? Not just the cost of hospital stays, but also loss of productivity, lower morale. There's OSHA fines that are out there, and many, many more. So my point in all this is to reinforce why protective apparel and choosing the right protective apparel to protect against these chemicals and or flame hazards is so important. If you can flip to the next slide. So before we get into the selection of PPE, it's important to know that we have to take a look at the hierarchy of controls, right? That being said, PPE is always the last line of defense. So once you've conducted a site hazard identification and risk assessment, you should apply the hierarchy of controls to minimize risks of the hazards identified. Again, PPE is the least effective way to manage hazards in the workplace. After elimination, substitution, engineering out the engineering controls, and administrative controls. But as we all know, oftentimes PPE is still needed after applying the hierarchy of controls. We can go to the next, yep. So let's take a moment and talk a little bit more about their hazard risk assessments, because they are a critical element of any safety program, and especially as it relates to selecting appropriate PPE for workers. So the hazards of each activity should be identified, and the exposure scenario should be assessed considering questions like listed here. How was the worker exposed? Where on the body would they be exposed, and or what type of exposure? Would it be a dermal, respiratory, or inhalation? How much are they being exposed to, the quantity? What's the concentration and intensity of the hazard? How long are they exposed, the duration? And how frequently are they being exposed? So it is important to consider things like the environmental conditions, temperature, humidity, and things of that nature to determine how we can help support you guys. Yep, thank you. So when we talk about selecting protective apparel, we like to think about three key considerations. As you can see here, those are protection, durability, and comfort. And we often talk about these three categories specifically in that order. First being protection, because it's the most important. Will the garment provide the protection needed against the hazards you identified during the hazard assessment? And do you have access to the data and information needed to support that? It will protect against those hazards. Next would be durability. This is an important consideration because it can impact how often you're replacing garments. If you need to change out garments multiple times throughout the tasks or shift, for example. Third would be comfort. Another important consideration, as we know that comfort of workers can impact compliance and overall productivity. Heat stress is a concern, and oftentimes PPE can play a role in contributing to it, especially now as we're in the summer months, right? So it's important to implement other programs and procedures to mitigate the risks of a heat stress incident. Ultimately, it's important when you're assessing different garments to try and find the best balance between protection, durability, and comfort. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, now we're going to go through a bit of a deep dive into these three challenges and highlight a few specific products in our portfolio that can help address these challenges for you. We'll start with the flame off scenario, where there are chemical hazards present, but no flame hazards. Then we'll tackle the flame on scenario, where there are both flame hazards and chemical hazards present. And then lastly, we'll talk about the uncertainty of what to choose and some of the resources that we have available to help guide you to your PPE selection. And with that, I will turn it over to Steve to take a deeper dive into this for you. You can flip to the next.
Okay, so as Joe said, we'll start with the chemical hazards that you guys might face on a daily basis, whether that's solvents, acids, or hydrocarbons, or more. Next slide. We'll begin with Tychem 6000. It's one of our highest level of chemical protective garments, covering a broad range of chemicals. Up until the only one above it would be Tychem 10,000, which is mainly utilized for emergency response Tychem level A garments, encapsulated level A's. So Tychem 6000 has been around for a while. As the chart shows, it provides at least 30 minutes of protection against 250 chemicals. It's a lightweight, strong, durable garment that is utilized on a daily basis throughout the chemical industries, refineries, maintenance operations, laboratories, as you see at the bottom of the chart. Next slide. So again, as Joe talked about, the three pillars of protection, durability, and comfort, we'll start with protection, which, as he mentioned, is the most critical in determining which garment you're going to be utilizing. Protection, when you're looking at chemical protection, there's two different standards or test methods that you will encounter when doing research. There's a penetration test and a permeation test, and they're vastly different. So a penetration test is an ASTM test, F903. It is a 60-minute test, but it's basically done to see how well the fabric is made. Are there defects in the fabric, or are there pinholes? If you look at the schematic graph right there, you can see that basically it's showing there's a pinhole in that fabric where the chemical can pass directly through. So it's a visual test. It's a 60-minute test, again, to see how well that fabric was made. If after 60 minutes you don't visually see the chemical passing through, then it passes the test. Also important to know, a penetration test, you cannot conduct any type of gas chemicals against that. It's mainly for liquids. Okay. So the more stringent, the more sensitive test, probably the most utilized when determining protection on chemical clothing, is what's called a permeation test. Again, an ASTM test, it's F739. This one, it's an 8-hour test now, and it utilizes a gas chromatograph, a test cell. In between this test cell, they'll place the fabric, and then on one side of that test cell, they'll put the challenge chemical. And on the other side, there's an instrument that measures when that chemical is passing through on a molecular level, meaning you may not see it with the naked eye, but yet it's still permeating through that fabric to the other side where it can actually harm the wearer. So that's, again, an 8-hour test, much more stringent, much vast difference than a penetration test. In the next slide, I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. So here's a chemical compatibility chart put out by another manufacturer of chemical clothing. And these people actually put down the penetration and permeation data. So I applaud them for putting out both of them. There's many manufacturers that just put out penetration data. And here's why I tell you there's a vast difference. So let's say this manufacturer comes to you and you say you have styrene and you say that your task lasts 1 hour. If you just look down the first column of penetration and you look down to styrene, you see that it passes that 60-minute test. So if you were only look at penetration and you put that person in this material, you would think they would have 60-minute of protection. But if you look just to the next column over, the permeation column, and you look at styrene again, and you look to see when that chemical actually broke through, it's less than 1 minute. So where you thought you had protection for 60 minutes, you're actually putting that person in that wearer in harm's way immediately. And you can see not only the styrene or toluene, but if you look down that whole chart, you can see how much it varies. Acetonitrile, they put IMB, which means immediately breaking through, which kind of puzzles me because the styrene's less than 1 minute. I would think that would be immediately breaking through as well. In fact, the permeation tests are done in triplicate and then taken an average. And normally what you would like to see is anything that averages 10 minutes or less be identified as immediately breaking through, because one test might be less than a minute, one test might be 12 minutes, but that's why it should be listed as immediately breaking through. So I don't remember if I recalled it or said it or not, but these are done in minutes. It's 60 minutes versus 12 minutes versus 1 minute versus 480 minutes. So you can see the vast difference when looking at penetration versus permeation. And I caution you on any material that you're looking at that only has penetration data. Next slide. So staying with protection, staying with Tychem 6000 that we were talking about earlier, has 30 minutes of protection for 250 chemicals. Here's the chemical compatibility chart for it. Well, somewhat. This is the ASTM F1001 challenge, 21 challenge chemicals that kind of give the user or wearer an idea of how this fabric would perform against chemicals that are that are common chemicals that are both liquid and gases. So you can see how well it does. Again, 480 on many of these chemicals, including 8 hours of protection against some of the bad, nasty ones like chlorine, benzene, styrene, and so forth. Okay. Tychem 6000 garments come in 4 different coverall styles. The TF145 is a coverall with an attached hood. That's what I normally see on a daily basis throughout the chemical industry, utilized for line breaking, loading and unloading, catching samples, and so forth. Some hazards might be where there's a lot more splash liquids coming on you, and so you might choose to have the TF169 that has attached sock boots, so just in case chemical is running into your chemical boots. Now you've got protection there. And then the other 2 sample offerings are really what I see mainly for emergency response when time is of necessity, where they both have attached gloves, so you can theoretically jump into your garment, already have your gloves on there, and go out and do the work quickly. Although I will say there's a couple of facilities that also choose to use attached gloves because of the hazard being much more hazardous. One that comes to mind is phenol. I know that I've caught on a couple of facilities that want attached gloves to take the human error out of the equation when you're taping their gloves to the suit. And then the TF611 is a fairly new garment for DuPont, a couple of years out now, that basically can be considered like a level B plus or A minus. It's as close as you can get to being a level A without being a level A. The opening is in the back away from the hazard. It has attached gloves, attached boots, and it has an elastomeric face piece that marries better with a respirator, so that the user, again, won't have to tape around that seal. So those are 4 offerings for Tychem 6000. Next slide. So we talked about protection. How durable is the garment? As Joe was talking about, you don't want to get out to your hazard and then have the garment fail while you're conducting that task. I often get the question, are your garments reusable? We say that our garments are multiple use, single exposure. If you don't expose it to any chemical, then yes, you can utilize that garment again after a visual inspection that it's still all in one piece. I will caution though that these garments, the storm flap is an adhesive that might not stick as well anymore. You might have to utilize a duct tape or chemical tape on that storm flap if you want to reuse it. These garments aren't very pricey at all, and so I would say in my 30 years of calling on chemical plants that over 90% of the use is one time and then dispose of it. Also for durability, just to put your mind at ease, the substrate of the Tychem 6000 is Tyvek. Tyvek is very, very durable. been utilized throughout the industry for many, many years, utilized throughout other industries, mailing envelopes, medical packaging, house wrap. It's very, very durable material. And so I can honestly say that these garments are very durable. Next slide. So here we've got a comparison of Tychem 6000. 6000 has been around for about 20 years. We're comparing it to our Tychem 5000, which probably has been out twice as long as Tychem 6000. When you're comparing these, you'll see that Tychem 6000 is tested to more chemicals. It's got the Tyvek substrate, and that's because it utilizes that substrate, it helps it to have a lighter weight garment. So it's lighter, thinner, more pliable. When you're talking about comfort in one of the three pillars. Next slide. So again, Tychem 6000, you got the protection. We've tested for over 250 chemicals. You got durability. It's got Tyvek substrate, and you got comfort because it's lightweight. Now we actually compared it against Tychem 5000, one of our other laminates, but in the industry, in fact, just this month, I visited 3 different facilities where they were still utilizing older technology in PVC garments. If you were to compare that, you're looking at 1/3 the weight, half the mill thickness, much, much more pliability. So when you talk about comfort, laminate garments are the new technology and keep you more comfortable. Next slide. Okay, so we talked about Tychem 6000, Tychem 5000, which are widely utilized throughout the industry. But what happens when we enter either flammable chemical, or the facility you're in has many flammables where it requires you to wear flame-resistant clothing on a daily basis? Historically, throughout the chemical industry, if you're doing a work on benzene, which is flammable, there would have to be a variance written where your outermost garment wasn't flame resistant, because which is a greater risk, a flash fire occurring or benzene getting on me. And so that's why Tychem 5000 and 6000 have been utilized as long as I've been around. So now we have garments that provide both chemical and flash protection. Next slide. So it's important to understand the difference between primary flame resistant clothing and secondary flame resistant clothing. Primary flame resistant clothing is something that is worn on a daily basis as soon as you enter the plant site. Many facilities are gate to gate, fence to fence. As soon as you get on, you've got to be wearing FR clothing. Primary FR clothing meets NFPA 2112 flash fire standard. That means that garment by itself on the thermal mannequin testing would pass that test in order for it to protect that individual who's wearing it. Secondary flame resistant clothing would not pass an FPA 2112 by itself. It must be used in conjunction with that primary daily FR garment that you're wearing every day. So it's important to know it will not pass 2112 by itself. It must be used in conjunction. And it's also important to know that any garment that's touting both chemical protection and flame resistant must not contribute to any additional thermal burns that the wearer of primary would experience without that on top of it. And I'll cover that in the next few slides. Next slide. Okay, so Tychem 6000 SFR. This is brand new from DuPont. We just introduced it in March. That SFR stands for secondary flame resistance. Okay, we talked about 6000. Now we have 6000 with the added flame resistance and secondary flame resistance. Again, we've tested it for many chemicals. 30 minutes protection for over 250, just like the Tychem 6000. It's based really upon that with the added protection of flame resistance now. Okay, next slide. So protection again. So here's a Tychem 6000 against the ASTM F1001-21 challenge chemicals, which includes both liquid and gas chemicals that are very common to the chemical industry. And you can see it does very well, just like Tychem 6000 did. Okay, next slide. So I alluded to this a while ago, DuPont Thermoman. Uncertain if you're familiar with Thermoman, but this is a life-size mannequin. It's a 6-foot mannequin. He's got 122 sensors all over his body. And the NFPA 2112 test, there's 12 torches around this mannequin. You gear them up in your FR clothing, and the torches go on for 3 seconds. Then they come off, they go off, and then these sensors gather the data from that mannequin to determine whether the total body burn of that person and whether it was first, second, or third degree burn. And then we actually marry it to the American Burn Association data, which would tell you the chances of surviving that flash fire. And that's really depends on the age bracket you fall into, whether or not you would survive, and it depends on the total body burn. Okay. And that was F1930. So what we're going to look at here on the next slide is these two burn that Thermoman burns. On the left side, you've got the mannequin geared up in a 4.5 ounce Navy Nomex coverall with a balaclava. And on the right side, the mannequin still has a 4.5 ounce Navy Nomex coverall and a balaclava, but now we put that secondary flame resistant garment on top, the Tychem 6000 SFR, and you'll see how they perform.
You're about to see a demonstration of the secondary flame resistance, SFR, of a Tychem 6000 SFR garment ensemble using the DuPont Thermoman Thermal Protection Evaluation System, equipped with 122 sensors. Tychem 6000 SFR garments provide broad chemical protection, offering at least 30 minutes of protection for more than 250 chemical challenges and secondary flame resistance in a durable, lightweight garment for use in environments where chemical splash and flash fire hazards exist. Both of these thermal mannequins are dressed in a commercial primary flame-resistant FR coverall and balaclava made with DuPont Nomex. On the right, a secondary flame-resistant garment made with Tychem 6000 SFR is added to create an ensemble. The thermal mannequins are exposed to flames for 3 seconds in a fire engulfment scenario. Secondary flame-resistant garments should not negatively impact the thermal performance of the primary FR protective clothing worn underneath. This demonstration indicates that when Tychem 6000 SFR coveralls are worn as an ensemble with the commercial primary FR protective clothing tested here, the predicted total burn injury is reduced compared to standalone commercial primary FR protective clothing when measured under these test conditions. The same trend is demonstrated when Tychem 6000 SFR is tested as an ensemble with a primary flame-resistant 6 ounce per square yard commercial coverall and balaclava made with DuPont Nomex. The predicted total burn injury under these test conditions is significantly reduced for the Tychem 6000 SFR garment ensemble compared to the standalone primary FR garments and balaclava made with Nomex.
Okay, so you saw the video, you saw how well Tychem 6000 SFR performed in that thermal mannequin testing, enhancing the protection of the wearer. what we didn't show, what we might put into our presentation next time is, so again, I told you historically, there was always variances written, which is a great risk, chemical exposure. So everyone used Tychem 5000 or Tychem 6000. If those were put on the top of the Thermoman, they would actually compromise the protection. It would be higher. So by utilizing these garments, the new Tychem 6000 SFR, you're actually enhancing that protection. Instead of over 30% body burn, you're bringing it down to 5% body burn on a 4.5 ounce primary garment. On a 6 ounce garment, it's even lower. It's 2.5% body burn. That's great as far as making certain that people go back home the way they came to work, right? Next slide. So that was protect. We talked about protection. Now let's talk about comfort. Again, obviously, I'm based here in Houston, Texas, where it's hot and humid. If you're putting an additional garment on top of your primary FR Nomex coverall, it's going to be hot. These garments are impervious. They must be impervious to protect you from those chemicals. But what I'll say as far as comfort goes is that these garments are very lightweight. They're very thin. As I said, just recently, I've come across facilities that are utilizing old technology PVC, where it's 3 times the weight, twice the thickness. These are much lighter garments. Not only that, the design is better as well. They're generously sized to keep comfort, yet they have elastic on the waist, so it moves with the wearer better, so they don't have to exert any more effort. And then also, if you look at the color, it's a light in color, so it won't draw the heat from the sun. And then finally, comfort can be a state of mind, right? So I'll steal something from one of my recent visits to a customer, where they said the color made them think of Bluebell homemade vanilla ice cream. So if you're thinking that way, it'll keep you comfortable, right? So that's the comfort situation on Tychem 6000. I'll turn it back to Joe now.
Thanks, Steve. Good stuff. Yeah, so we're here to help, right? If you're still uncertain on what product to choose, we have multiple resources to help you in selecting and narrow down which garment may be appropriate for specific job functions or chemical hazards. So that being said, we'll kind of give you an idea of our portfolio that we have, which is a very broad portfolio. So we only focused in on 2 of our solutions today, which would be our Tychem 6000 and our Tychem 6000 SFR, which would be in the orange category there. But we have a much broader portfolio for everything from keeping non-hazard particles like dirt off your clothes, all the way up to encapsulated level A suits, which would be our Tychem 10,000 product line. So again, as you can see here, we dive into many different buckets depending on what your hazard is on site. One of the resources that is available to you is our DuPont Safe Spec. It is a tool we offer to help you determine what suit may be best for your applications. It houses all the product information and technical specs on all those products from the last slide. Arguably, most importantly, it houses our chemical permeation data, which you can find on there, with thousands of permeation data points for our fabrics tested against various chemical hazards. You can use our product selector tool to search by hazard and go through the prompts related to your exposure scenario to really help you determine which DuPont garment may be suitable for your application or task. You can access SafeSpec online via web browser or by downloading the SafeSpec on the mobile app by that green check mark there. So a couple different ways that you can have access to it. You want to select there. Thank you. As part of the Safe Spec product selector tool, you can search by 3 different ways, right? Hazard would be your first one, which is most common way to utilize this app here to find out which garment would be best for what hazard you're facing. So that would be by the CAS number, and then answer a series of questions about the exposure scenario. You can also search by industry, like chemical manufacturing, or use a guide. Each 3 of these are options when you click on the product selectors. And I would encourage you to visit the site and download the app. Just play around with it a little bit as a tool to see which option fits your needs best. Thank you. Also wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of a new tool we launched this year in Safe Spec. It's called the Safe Spec Assistant, which is an interactive AI-powered chat tool that provides information to help you make informed decisions about using Tyvek, Tychem, and ProShield protective apparel. You can access Safe Spec Assistant by clicking on the icon at the Safe Spec website and type your question or some pre-populated prompts that will help guide you along the way as well. Thank you. Here you'll see a decision tree tool. So it's, as some of today's discussion revolved around the need for chemical and flame resistant protective apparel, I wanted to share a real just high level decision tree we like to use when thinking through CRFR, chemical resistant, flame resistant garment selection. Starting at the top center, is chemical barrier protection required, will be your first question, right? So if not, but flame protection is required, then workers can wear primary FR clothing, such as our DuPont Nomex material. If chemical barrier is required, but flame protection is not, then workers can just wear their standard chemical protective clothing like a Tychem 6000 or any of the other products that we have that can also be brought forward through the selector tool. If both chemical and flame protection are required, that's where our secondary flame resistant or SFR portfolio comes into play, but only if they're wearing primary FR, as Steve mentioned earlier in the presentation. So their primary FR would be their undergarment and a secondary flame resistant over top. Looking at our secondary flame resistant portfolio, we really only covered the Tychem 6000 SFR today, which provides a broad level of protection against flammable organic solvents, toxic industrial chemicals, and many more. But we also have things like Tychem 2000 SFR, which is good for protection against inorganic acids, bases, and industrial cleaning chemicals. And we also have our relatively newer release Tyvek 400 SFR, which is good for protection against hazardous and non-hazardous particles. Thank you. Finally, for further support, we have a team of certified industrial hygienists who help provide technical support for our end user customers for inquiries related to complex environments, permeation data, job hazard assessments, and much more. So please feel free to reach out, and our team can get you connected with the CIH team to help to support you along the way with those hazard assessments for you. So to summarize a few key takeaways from today's session, hopefully we were able to provide you some insights around selecting a standard chemical protective suit like our Tychem 6000 versus a multitude of chemical hazards and secondary flame resistant suits like our Tychem 6000 SFR. It's important to remember that this selection should always be tied back to your hazard risk assessment that's being performed. Right? So hopefully you have a clear view of what secondary flame resistant clothing is. SFR protective clothing must be worn over top of primary flame resistant clothing. We emphasize that, and is worn in multi-hazard environments to provide protection from particles and or liquid chemicals without negatively impacting the thermal protection provided by your primary FR clothing. Finally, we have solutions and resources to help you Again, today we highlighted Tychem 6000 for chemical hazards and our Tychem 6000 SFR for flame and chemical hazards. But we have a wide range of garments to fit your needs. And we also have SafeSpec as well as many other resources to support you and your protective apparel selective needs. Can go to the last slide there. With that, we'd like to thank you for your attention today, and we're open to any questions. For your reference, before we jump into questions, Steve and my contact information is listed if you'd like to follow up with either of us. Additionally, you'll see the QR codes to download SafeSpec mobile app, as well as highlight of the new e-guide we published in our resource center with more information on secondary flame-resistant garments. So thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully this information was informative. And again, we encourage you to take some time to jump on SafeSpec and just play around with it a little bit, add some chemicals that you might be associated with, and we'll certainly be there to help support you along the way.
Fantastic, Joe. That was a lot of really great information in such a short period of time. Now is the questions period of the webinar. So if you have any questions for the team, make sure that you get those in now. I highly, highly encourage you to take down the information that's on the screen now. Get in touch with Steve, get in touch with Joe, reach out to the DuPont team. Make sure that you are connecting so that you can keep you and your team safe. All right, so question here. How does SFR gear compare in terms to fit, weight, and comfort? For example, is increased thermal protection compromised by reduced mobility?
I'll take that. Again, no, it's not reducing your mobility. It's based on the same substrate of Tyvek. It's the same film laminates. And in fact, it depends on actually what you're comparing it to. I mean, again, I recently visited several sites where they were utilizing a PVC garment, which is 3 times heavier and twice the mill thickness. So they're very lightweight, very, very pliable.
Okay, perfect. Good to know. Are there, or can you go over the recommended inspection or usage guidelines to ensure SFR performs correctly over time?
I would recommend, like any PPE, that you inspect prior to use, right? I think that's an important caveat when you've taken the time to select your PPE. Steve, you can add on to it, I'm sure, but just like a safety harness, right? You wouldn't throw that on without fully inspecting that to ensure that your person's going to be safe, right? So the same would apply to a garment as well. Just making sure, again, things can happen within storage where punctures may occur, those type of things may happen. So just again, quality inspecting that PPE prior to use is always going to be a little bit helpful.
Okay, perfect. And can you reiterate how you determine whether SFR or standard chemical protection is most appropriate for a specific job or hazard?
Sure, it would depend on that hazard. Though, if you're dealing with a flammable gas or liquid, such as like a benzene, any hydrocarbon actually, if they're working around hydrocarbons, then there's a risk of a flash along with chemical, and therefore you would need both. So, and there's also facilities where the facility itself might require FR garment. So let's just say you're doing a task on sulfuric acid, which isn't flammable, but yet you're in an area where there's other flammables that you aren't actually coming in contact with, but there's still a risk for a flash. Then you would still want to wear a garment that provided both chemical and flash.
All right, fantastic. Well, guys, that's it for questions for now. We still have some time, so if you have any questions for the team, make sure you get them in. But Joe, Steve, I wanted to put it back to you. Is there anything you want our audience to keep top of mind or take away from today so that they can be safe while navigating this journey?
So I would reiterate 2 things. Again, when you're assessing the chemical protection, make certain you're looking at permeation, not penetration. They both start with P. They're very close in wording. So, everyone gets busy now and there in their daily basis. So understand there's a vast difference that I went over. And then secondly, I'll also reiterate as far as for flame resistance, you want to make certain or ask that manufacturer that's touting their garment if they have data on the thermomannequin F1930, because there are some very misleading standards out in the industry. Some manufacturers will tout NFPA 701. 701, if you actually looked into it, is a standard for flame resistance for drapery. So it's important those are the two things that I would caution and make certain that you're looking at: permeation instead of penetration, and do they have data on the thermomannequin F1930?
Okay, perfect. Joe, do you have any final words?
No, I encourage. A lot of times people think change is scary. Change can be scary, but that's where we're here to help support you. You know, as you introduce new chemicals on site, take that out as an opportunity to do a risk hazard assessment. Right, we're here to help support you guys. So please don't be afraid to reach out to your regional sales manager. Again, we have resources like our certified industrial hygienist, Safe Spec, to help support you. We want to be a partner with you. And so I encourage you guys to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. Again, as I mentioned, be sure to take down the information that's on the screen now. Reach out to your DuPont team. Joe mentioned that the change is scary, but job place hazards are even scarier. So make sure you're reaching out to your team. Make sure you're connecting with the higher ups to know that you can to get the right garments in the right places. So everyone, I want to thank you for being here today. Steve, Joe, huge shout out to you, as well as the DuPont team, as well as AD Safety Network for allowing you to be here. And of course, the audience, because without all of you guys, our workplaces would not be safe and we could not do any of this. So thanks again. Take care. Stay safe. Bye, everyone.